And it's week 50 on the calendar, and you're welcome to another edition of our weekend business program, Capital Market Live on Channel Television. I'm Ladi Williams. It's great to have you join us. Let's kick off now with major markets. Now, talking about global stock markets performance on Friday, we see major equity markets around the world ended the second full week of December, mostly in the red, as investors processed a combination of monetary policy decisions announced by European central banks and the Bank of England on Thursday. At the same time, disappointing U.S. retail sales for November suggested inflation is taking a toll on consumers and raising fears that the Fed's rate hikes are tipping the world's biggest economy into a recession. In the United States, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell by 0.85%. The S&P 500 dropped 1.11%, while the Nasdaq Composite ended Friday's trading session lower by nearly 1%. In Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 dipped 1.27%. Germany's DAX index lost 0.67%, while France's CAC index fell by over 1%. Across Asia Pacific, Japan's Nikkei 225 dropped by 0.78%, while China's Shanghai Composite Index was down by just a tad, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was the only gainer for the day. All right, now let's talk to Olumide Addition, our financial market analyst. Tell us what's happening with those markets. We'll be drilling down on the U.S. markets. Great to have you, Olumide.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ladi. Good evening.
Good evening. So, yeah, big sell-offs in the U.S. markets on Friday. And again, it's recession fears again. You know, it's almost like investors, we know what to expect, but we still see these sell-offs in the market. Hello, Olumide. Olumide, can you hear me? All right, looks like I can't seem to hear Olumide at this time. Well, let's bring it back home now. See that for the local stock market, sentiment ended the trading week of November on a positive note, adding a 0.89% this week to a 1.51% increase recorded last week. The gain is largely attributed to bargain hunting for high-value equities such as Zenith Bank, Evan Holdings, and Lafarge, with support from other bellwether stocks. Similar positive sentiment was also seen across 4 out of the 5 major sectors of the NGX. Only the consumer goods counter recorded a downbeat performance for the week as it closed 0.20% in the red. Learn Africa's share price topped a list of 32 gainers, up by more than 28%. McNichols led 27 other losers, down by 11.48%, while 97 equities remained unchanged in prices. The shares of Sterling Bank, Axis Holdings, and GTCO were the most significant contributors to a total of 814.08 million shares traded within the week. The unlisted securities market activities ended the week negative as the NASD OTC Exchange Security Index fell further by more than 0.25%. At the same time, the market capitalization fell by 2.61 billion naira to close the week at 930.74 billion naira due to sell pressure by investors. However, total volume of securities traded on the exchange increased by 644% week on week to 10.4 million units, while total value of securities traded during the week decreased by 23.58% to 32.05 million naira. Meanwhile, UBN Properties, which led to other losers, was down by about 9%, was also the most traded security on the NASD OTC market this week. All right, now to understand the unlisted securities market better, we have in the studio with us Mr. Ehwaride Longe, Managing Director, NASD OTC. Join us right here in the studio. Great to have you. Good evening.
Good evening.
And compliments of the season.
I wish you the same.
So, obviously, this market is one market that's been with us for a while now, and I'm sure there are a couple of people that are still trying to wrap their heads around how this market works.
Yes.
Can you break down the concept of this unlisted securities market?
So, the OTC market, the unlisted security market, is really, it really originates from companies that are not either for one reason or the other are not able to access the organized markets. So you might look at financial markets as exchange-based and over-the-counter based. And an over-the-counter market is simply an informal market in comparison with the exchange, more formal markets. But having said that, I mean, that's just a broad description. OTC markets are usually thought to be bilateral, where individuals or dealers reach prices and reach deals with each other. And the other participants in the market may not know what those prices are and may not be in the know of what opportunities there are on the market. There's no formal trading platform, and then disclosures are traditionally a little less than the formal exchanges. So there is location, there is price discovery, and then there is disclosure to think about when you're thinking about the OTC markets traditionally. So you might even look at it and say, I mean, let's take a parallel. I mean, the popular markets, I mean, the United States markets. So there are two major markets there, and that's the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ OMX group. Outside of that market, there are over 12,000 securities listed on 12,000 securities that trade on what you might call an OTC market, the OTC market group. But that's broken down even further. We can speak about that a bit more as we go along in the discussion.
But what exactly is the major difference between, the unlisted securities market and the regular exchanges that we have?
So the regular exchanges, I mean, so the companies actually approach the exchange. The exchange has, that's being blurred now, but most of the exchanges have trading floors. Right, so you know about the movies where you look at the trading pits of the New York Stock Exchange. That's really is a clear definition. Traders go to the markets and make trades. So there's also price made on an auction basis. So the prices are formally made. I mean, you close one day and you open the next day. And the quantities traded are known by all the participants. The participants are registered by the regulatory authorities. In Nigeria, it is the Securities and Exchange Commission. Sub-regulators are companies like NASD, PLC, and all the other exchanges. So the formal markets are more admits companies in a structured way. Whereas you might look at the OTC markets as an individual wanting to trade their shares and simply approaching a company over the counter to say, I have these shares to trade, can you find a buyer for me? That's how it normally starts. That's how NASD started. Mostly originating from the financial markets collapse in 2008, where a lot of companies had done public offers and hadn't issued their certificates, and then the market collapsed and people were looking to trade those shares when the certificates got issued, and so NASD emerged saying that it would provide liquidity transparently. So that's where you've got the moniker of unlisted securities. But NASD is more.
Right.
NASD is much more.
So how is trading really organized, for the OTC market?
That's interesting, because ordinarily it should be a willing buyer, willing seller. When I was a younger trader...
And are there brokers, really?
Oh, yes. I was going to come to that.
Oh, okay.
When I was a younger trader, we used to have what we call the Kakawa brokers. I mean, and those were people who tried to get bargains outside of what was the Nigerian Stock Exchange at the time. So you might call that somewhat of an OTC market. So people look at it almost like if they were hawking shares. So you have an OTC market where people do have shares, right? And they want to trade them. I mean, so maybe they're unlisted, and then they have to go to dealers to say, use your network to get a buyer for me. I mean, and since you don't have a formal structure, it's a negotiation that you do to get those shares traded. But over time, that begins to get formalized. You know, companies actually see the benefits, those unlisted companies see the benefits of the image projection on those markets, and then they begin to formalize their relationship with those markets.
So, obviously, there is, you have the buyers, you have the sellers, but
yes.
How are the prices of these securities, how are they determined, really?
So I go back to a question you asked, maybe I didn't answer properly. Yes, so you have registered brokers on our markets. And the brokers are registered according to the Securities and Exchange Commission provisions. NESD itself is a Securities and Exchange Commission licensed exchange. You know, so it's not, you couldn't call it an informal structure that is done by Kakawa brokers, if you know what I mean. You know, so the shares, NESD's trading is done by an order-driven system, right? It's order, and you make the prices based on an auction as well. You know, so the lines begin to get blurred. The brokers actually make prices on behalf of their customers, and those prices are put on a trading engine, an electronic trading engine, and people make prices, people make bids, you know, and at the end of the day, you have a cutoff of what the price is closed at. You spoke about what the index did at the end of Friday. You know, so that's how the prices are made. It's an order and quotation-driven system.
Quite interesting. And I know these stocks are categorized, you know, in different, you know, levels
yes.
of the NESD. Can
yes.
you tell us the categories and how investors, you know, interact with the different categories?
Okay, so you see a very important point. I mean, and let me stretch this a bit. So. This is on the unlisted securities markets. I spoke about an informal relationship. So, as it were, an individual can come and say, I have the shares of XYZ company and I want to trade it. NESD, a broker trading on NESD, can you find a buyer for me? And then the procedure is that the broker initiates a registration of those securities on NESD, and then they have a footprint on the market. The company does not need to know, right? And so quite a few of the, a good number of the companies admitted to NESD are not formally written into NESD. They're not formally signed on to NESD, so it's their securities that trade. And you well know that if you don't have an explicit commitment to a process, you can decide whether you want to comply or not. You know, so we have that challenge with NESD. So there are two routes. You can either come by listing securities initiated by the shareholder, or the company itself can come to list. That's initiated by the company, and that's called company admission. Now, with company admissions, you find better compliance. With securities listing, you don't find as good a compliance as you'd find in the other one. You know, so to promote that compliance, I mean, to encourage it, we've categorized the securities admitted to NESD under some colors. You know, colors gravitated on compliance. So we have the blue category, we have the pink category, and we have the red category. Blue, full compliance. Financially strong companies, you may call them blue chips. The pink companies, they've complied in the past, but for some reason, they don't comply as strongly as they used to comply before. The red companies, purely red.
Purely red.
Purely red. They're not.
I wonder if anyone buys the purely red.
People do.
People do, right?
People do. I mean, for different reasons. You know, people do. I mean, yeah, you spin your dollar and you spin your naira. Sorry.
Right.
You spin your naira and say, I can make a change on this entity, and you go for it.
All right. Great. All right, we'll take a quick break now. When we come back, we've been drilling on the OTC market. We'll get there some more information. We still have Mr. Longe here with us to tell us more about this market. We'll take a quick break now. When we come back, the conversation continues. Do stay with us. This is Capital Market. Welcome back. Still watching Capital Market live on Channel Television. We're drilling down on the OTC unlisted markets, and we still have with us here Mr. Alonge, Managing Director, NASD OTC, still with us right here in the studio. Great to have you still here, and thank you for staying on. So we're talking about the different categories, earlier, and you did say the red category still had, some attention, from investors. But looking at the market, generally, is this a market for long-term investors or short-term investors?
The capital market is traditionally for medium to long-term investors. Many people go in with short-term objectives, and sometimes they win. But most times it's a long, slow distance, so you have to decide what you want to do, be able to put patient capital into the capital market in the different asset classes, and then see how your money grows therewith.
And obviously, I'm sure the NASD have quite a lot, in store for us. It's been a long 2022, and obviously investors, have not had it easy, in 2022, and obviously we're still getting, some sound bites about 2023. Some investors are expecting more pain, ahead for most of these, global markets. What should we expect from the NASD going into 2023?
Okay, so let me just take a step back before I go into 2023. So the capital market has evolved in Nigeria. There have been a lot of interesting things that have happened before 2022, but have been more emphasized in 2022. So when there used to be one market that traded equities, and perhaps in the money markets, the financial markets, the dealers association then traded fixed income, you had those two choices. But today you have equities, you have fixed income, you have commodities exchanges, you have people trading gold. So there are different markets, and that's positive. So I think that one question that is very pertinent is, why do you have to have two exchanges, an unlisted market and then a more, what you might call a main market? So I think it's from the perspective of deepening value. This is the reason why I say that there are more choices for investors today. It's from the perspective of deepening value. And I always describe it as the bigger markets are flying at 34,000 feet. And we, the smaller markets, are flying with a helicopter, so we can see the nuances on the ground. So our job is to discover the detail, the minutiae on the ground, develop it and take it up to the 34,000 feet companies perhaps, or grow our business, and also rival the people who are flying at 34,000 feet. So when you look at NASD, there is an urgent need to improve content. So there's, I would say, maybe somewhat of a narrow trading opportunity. There are the usual suspects on the markets, which people have traded traditionally over the last 10 years. But we have to expand that. We see a lot of opportunity in the small and medium enterprises sector. There are quite a number of high-growth small and medium enterprises, serious companies, that we are working with. We have a platform called the NASD Enterprise Portal. That portal is to connect small and medium enterprises to angel investors, help them grow, put capacity behind them, and then prepare them for real money, and real growth. Right. Also supply chain financing. And there are quite a number of other things we're doing. I'm interested in speaking about the automotive industry. Right. Because we see significant opportunity there.
All right. Well, we'll be watching out for the NASD, obviously, in 2023. Just a couple of days away from that. So I want to thank you so much, Mr. Wayde Alonge, Managing Director, NASD OTC. It was great having your perspective today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, there we're talking about the unlisted securities market now. So let's try and get back Olumide Adesina now to give us what happened, with the U.S. markets this week on Friday, and get an outlook for next week. Hello, Olumide.
Yeah, thanks for having me once again, Ladi. Good evening.
Great. I guess we have you better now. The network is much better. Thank you so much for staying on, Olumide. So we saw the big sell-offs in the U.S. markets on Friday, and obviously we're still hearing the big dreaded R word, recession. How are you seeing it?
Yeah, I think the big culprit for this week was the Fed. That was because despite the accelerated interest rate hike by 50 basis points, the narrative was quite hawkish than anticipated. The Fed mentioned that by next year, interest rates will go as high as 5.1%. That was far higher than what the market anticipated. And we saw drawdowns in growth stock, particularly the tech sector. Stocks like Apple moderated below the support level of $105. We saw Google also breaking below $90 support level. And that was triggered by the fact that global recession seems to be on the table. Look at retail sales from the second most powerful economy in the world. I'm talking about China. We could see that sales growth plummeted at record levels. Also, the demand for crude oil has also kept prices below $80, and that has affected commodity energy stocks particularly. But having said all these things, I think on the bigger corporates on the micro level, Tesla broke below the $155 support level, and that was triggered by the fact that the world's richest man, the former world's richest man, Elon Musk, kept selling Tesla stocks. For the past week, he sold about 3.6 billion, and this year alone, he has sold 40 billion. And that has kept a lot of Tesla investors shaky, despite the fundamentals still showing that the company still has strong growth. But if you look at different variables, I think one thing to pick is that the legendary investor, Warren Buffett, seems to be beating the market, and that was because of his bet in Chevron. Chevron this year has risen by 50% year to date, despite his weak exposure in Apple that seems to be having negative year-to-date returns. And that just tells you that the world's richest man, the world's legendary investor is having it right. If you look at the outlook for the year, we're still expecting a Santa rally because it looks like this week the Dow lost over 1,000 points. It means it's at an oversold position. So investors are betting that tempers will be brought into control, and other upgrades, especially on Meta. JP Morgan during the week upgraded Meta stock based on the fact that they see headwinds moderating, and the fact that the US government are trying to ban TikTok. That could help boost Facebook's margin.
All right. Well, so much happening, in the global markets at this time, and obviously, everyone's still expecting that Santa rally. We're hoping, that actually happens sometime, this in December. Thank you so much, Olumide, additional financial market analyst. Thank you for your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, now let's get a quick outlook now for markets here in Nigeria. We see for the money market, we see total inflows of 545 billion naira fact disbursements and 5 billion naira OMO maturities to saturate. That would actually saturate the system liquidity. The T-bills market, we see yields expected to tilt down from current levels, demand to remain strong on anticipated liquidity inflow. And for the bonds market, we see yields are expected to rise as liquidity weakens. The equities market, we see bullish sentiments expected to continue amid positioning by investors ahead of the 2022 full-year dividend declarations. Financial markets to begin a two-day Christmas holiday before Friday, December 23rd. And we'll obviously still be looking out for that Santa rally right here in the Nigerian equities market. Thank you so much for being a part of the show today. I'm Ladi Williams. Enjoy the weekend.